Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we are glad to have you on our virtual Tuesday. The song that you just heard is telling the story of young kids in Israel asking to grow up in peace without war. I used to listen to this song when I was a kid, and after the recent terror attacks in Israel, I felt appropriate to share it with you all. So thank you. Now, please help me welcome our expert tour guide, Jacob Shushan. Let me add him to my spotlight so you can see him. For those of you who are not still familiar with Jacob, he is a licensed tour guide in Israel, as well as a teacher and lecturer at the Tour Guide College in Israel. Shushan is always a senior tour director and lecturer for the Geographical Society in Israel. Shushan has visited 98 countries, maybe it's already higher than that, and he led tours in 65 countries on all 6 continents. Jacob is fluent in 15 languages, which is incredible, and he presents in-depth discussion on Jewish history, philosophy, and culture, and is deeply involved in Holocaust education. Jacob will be guiding us on our trip to Israel this coming October, and we couldn't be more happier about it. So thank you, Jacob, for being here and doing all of this for us. I'm gonna let you now start and take us back to Egypt. You're muted.
Shalom, everybody. So glad you joined us today. Will be a very different trip today. We're discussing quite a sensitive topic. I'll start the presentation and we'll take it from there. Can everybody see the opening slide? Thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll get the pointer. And there you are. So the topic I thought should highlight more than anything else, the historical connection will be the Geniza, but we'll visit the Geniza later on. First of all, where do we go to now? Of course, Egypt, you know where it is, next to Israel, between Libya, Sudan, the Sinai Peninsula. A little more of what we have now here is the different route that we will take today. Actually, we'll be traveling from Alexandria in the north, very little, much more in Cairo, on our way to Luxor, Aswan, and Abu Simbel, which is right very close to the border with Sudan in the southern part. It's a huge country. Look at the size of the country and huge population. Actually, they are collapsing under the overgrowth, really. 1 million new babies are born every 9 months. Look at the number of the Jewish population, though. Only a little over 70 years ago, 100,000, maybe even more, we don't know. Today, 120, if any, probably even less, but we don't know. So everybody knows the story. We're going to discuss soon, in a few days during the Seder, we'll discuss Exodus coming out of Egypt. Where were they while in Egypt? Probably in this area, it says, in the land of Goshen, whereas we will discuss all of these regions here between Nof, Memphis, and on, Heliopolis, and much more. We separate Egypt into 2 distinctively separate kingdoms in ancient times. There is Lower Egypt and Upper Egypt. Hence, probably, the name Mitzrayim, which is in Hebrew, and Mitzrayim, the form denotes something which is dual, like you say, Enaim, Yadaim, right? You know these words. So probably we're talking about 2 Egypts already then, of course. The earliest mentioning comes back from over 5,100 years ago, this beautiful work of art of Naarmer, King Mina, the one who united Upper and Lower Egypt. Look at the dates of his life, uh, quite a long time ago. And after him came the people who, as you very well know, built the pyramids, except that maybe now is a time to break a little urban legend. The Jews did not build the pyramids. When the first Hebrews got to Egypt, the pyramids have stood up already hundreds of years. The Great Pyramid, built by Khufu, one of the greatest kings of all times, look at when he ruled, 4,600 years ago almost, and that's centuries before the Hebrews came there. He's the one who built this amazing Great Pyramid. His son continued and built the second pyramid, and he built the Sphinx, which protects the temple leading to his pyramid. But we jump to our story and we go centuries down the line, and we know that Abraham, who was born in this area in Mesopotamia, in the country which is today somewhere between Iraq, and traveled by way of Syria to Turkey, came to the land of Canaan, but because of the hunger that was in the country, he ended up in Egypt for a while before he came back. We also know that Joseph traveled to Egypt, not because he chose to. Remember, his brothers sold him to a convoy of nomads. He ended up being a kind of a viceroy, very high-ranking position in the government. And years later, we know that the Egyptians were traveling all over on distant regions, into distant regions from Egypt, either on trade or on war. One of the mightiest kings of all times, again, Ramses II, has conquered many, many different villages and towns in the country, including Jaffa, and we found some ruins dating back to his period in Jaffa, next to Tel Aviv, and this is a reconstruction of the gate that he built there. Going back to talk about Goshen, the land where they lived, we know that they have left. It says that they built Pithom and Ramses. We think this is where Ramses, the town, they built. So if the pyramids are here, you see they were hundreds of miles away from the pyramids. We don't know that any of them has ever been to the pyramids. The pyramids are not mentioned. We only know they had to build with bricks and straw and mortar. And finally, under the leadership of Moses, they left Egypt, and we have a few suggested routes they might have taken by way of going for 40 years, spending this time in the Sinai, going into the Negev desert to the area of Kadesh, and then crossing back into the land of Edom, all the way to this area, to the site where the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea, where they have crossed by the plains of Moab into the Promised Land. You're gonna find many versions. Some of them are longer, some of them are shorter. The different scholars are trying to identify the sites and stations along that long journey. 40 years is a long time. So this is basically what we have. Who was the king of Egypt at the time? Some scientists suggest it was Ramses II. Some people suggest it was his son, Mereptah, because he is the only one that mentions the Israelites in any form or shape in the many, many different scriptures, manuscript, written material, drawn, paved, chiseled on the rocks, carved out of the walls and whatever. In his tale, in his big monument, he describes his conquest and he attributes so many achievements to himself. And right down here, he says, Israel, not even Israel, instead of L, it ends with an R, was defeated. Nothing is left of it. And that's it. That's the only mentioning we have of the presence, the 400 years, according to the Bible, of the Hebrews in Egypt. Of course, they left the country. They traveled in the desert, they came and settled in the promised land, and this is the map showing us how the land was distributed between the various tribes, the children of Jacob, except that some years later, the kingdom was united, first under Saul a little while, but mostly under David and Solomon. But we have another story of the breaking of the kingdom into two kingdoms. We have an uprising, and we have Judah and Israel, two kingdoms in between these neighboring nations. We have here now another pharaoh, the pharaoh called Shishak, who invaded the country, and he's the one who has looted all the treasures that used to be in the temple in King Solomon Palace, all the gold that was accumulated there over the years. And here is a list of the territories he conquered. In ancient Egyptian insignia, this item is called a cartouche. It denotes royalty, looks like the womb tied and sealed with the umbilical cord. And here you see that all these kings are led like slaves. And we know these are Semitic nations because they have bearded, they have very different facial features than the Egyptians do. And that is where he lists the different towns that he took. He talks about Megiddo, they mention in Egyptian scriptures Lachish, and they mentioned Gezer, and many different towns supposedly they have conquered. Some centuries later, Egypt is conquered by the Persians, and he, the king Cambyses, sends in the 6th century BCE, before the Common Era, he sends some Jewish soldiers to defend the borders of his kingdom, and he sends them to the place where the southernmost border of Egypt used to be, by the big cataracts, almost impassable route along the Nile River, where we have many rocks and many islands. And that is where they settles them, and they create a Jewish military community, except that that community that settled on the island of Elephantine, right next to the city of Aswan, we'll be visiting Aswan later, they built a temple, but they offered sacrifices to God, a Jewish temple to our Hebrew God. What animals did they sacrifice? We'll find out. Where the lamb, and what happens is the ram, the sheep, is kind of a sacred animal to the people who used to be their next door neighbor, the priest of the local god Kunum. But we'll talk about it later on. We leave this area with the special temple that they have built to see that they were right next door to the Egyptian temple of Khnum. Impossible, and that was gone. We have the description here on the walls of their temples, and we see how the ancient Egyptians were offering their faith and worshiping. This is the image of the god Khnum with the ram horn. We found some Hebrew scriptures there, which is so fascinating. Some of the earliest known Hebrew scriptures dating back to that time. And now we have another story about the Queen of Sheba, who visited Solomon some centuries earlier, came back to Ethiopia pregnant, and she apparently bore a son to him. When he grew up, she sent him to study with his father. On his way back to Ethiopia, the tradition of the Ethiopian is that the priest who accompanied him stole the holy ark from the temple in Jerusalem. But on their way to Ethiopia, there were floodings and they were stranded, and they settled in that area before they could continue. They carried it to Ethiopia, and they believed that the Holy Ark containing the 10 Commandments Moses brought down from Mount Sinai is kept in a church in Ethiopia, in the town of Exum. How do you hide it? How do you hide the tree? They say, you hide the tree in the forest, that's how you hide something. So guess what? Every one of the 30,000 churches in Ethiopia has a copy of the Holy Ark, which was stationed in this island, so we will not know. These are amazing stories that relate to the community in Egypt. Going back to our story, when we talk about Egypt, we would like to concentrate on the area here of Cairo. Next to Cairo, we have this city called Heliopolis. The Bible mentions it as On, and we have these interesting excavations with one remaining obelisk, as we can see in the community of On. I mention it because it was here that a family of priests who lost their entitlement to priesthood built a temple. They left Jerusalem, moved to Heliopolis, and the Onias temple was built in the 2nd century to rival the one in Jerusalem. This is before King Herod. This is just about when the Hasmoneans were installing their powers in Jerusalem. So a fascinating story of a Jewish temple, a big, beautiful Jewish temple that was built right next to the city of Cairo, and we still have some remains from that temple standing today. Moving to the modern city of Cairo, nestled on both sides of the Nile River, we see an interesting combination that echoes years gone by, a little Western influence, very much Middle Eastern, Muslim and Christian influence, beautiful Muslim architecture in hundreds of mosques and madrasas, which are theological seminars, mausoleums to the Muslim rulers, especially from the Middle Ages, very, very colorful bazaar, like this Khan el-Khalili bazaar. Actually, I was there just yesterday morning, I was just strolling the lanes of this bazaar, and I flew back into Israel last night. So it is a very vivid, very vivacious, colorful bazaar. A very interesting place to visit is the Saladin citadel, built in the 12th century by that famous Muslim ruler. He was not an Arab, he was a Muslim, a Kurd, who built the citadel when he conquered Egypt. Centuries later, in the 19th century, Muhammad Ali built here a magnificent mosque. No matter how you look at it, the city always looks up to the pyramids in Giza, which are not too far away from the city itself. Actually, Giza grew so big, it's a town by itself nowadays, but we cross it in order to go and visit the pyramids.
Jacob, just unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Did I unmute? Yes, I think I am muted. Sorry, I had to take a little water. Sorry. So we look at these amazing, amazing structures, the oldest item of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and the only one in existence. So it is a very special treat, a very special experience, very moving, even if you are not into any kind of beyond and over, but you are really, it's awe-inspiring standing in front of these unbelievable structures. Imagine 2.3 million stones, each weighs approximately 2.5 tons. How on earth did they do it? I must have watched gazillion movies, read gazillion books, heard many lectures. To be honest with you, I was not convinced with any of the theories I heard about how were they able to build it? How were they able to move them, to lift them? 4,600 years ago, for crying out loud. Unbelievable. Lots of the ancient stuff is presented in the museum. I think yesterday I must have visited this museum for many, many times by now, for over 41 years, but that was probably the last time I visited it because a new museum is going to be built soon. So I bid farewell yesterday with great excitement to the ancient Egyptian museum built over 120 years ago, where I saw these Narmer palettes and I saw many of the artifacts, but it was like a crowded warehouse. The items there are not nicely presented because they have so much to show and they didn't want to skip, in addition to tens of thousands of items still in the cellars and in storage. But a new one is going to be built. Right now, they are taking the items one by one into labs to preserve, to study them carefully, to document. They carefully wrap them, and they slowly move them to the newest museum, which will be the largest museum in the world. It's going to open in November, and I can't wait to see it. I'm sure everybody will be excited to think about it. Not only these amazing treasures of Tutankhamun, like the death mask and the coffin, imagine 400 pounds solid gold with all the jewelry and all the decorations. Look at these gorgeous works of art from 3,200 years ago. Everything will be moved to the new museum, and it will be right at the foothills of the pyramids with windows looking at the pyramids. So that will be another special experience. And it was built in a way that is inconspicuous, will not stand in the way, will not hide the view of the pyramids from anywhere, just merging with the surface. So it's still being done and can't wait, of course, to see it. One of the interesting items that will be moved there is the solar boat built for King Khufu, the one who built the Great Pyramid, to help bring his body across the Nile River. You see, the Egyptians saw the sun rising in the east, setting down in the west, so they lived in the east and they buried the dead in the west, so they'll resurrect to win eternal life. Many, many interesting objects. That was a special building accommodating the boat at the foothills of the pyramid, but it was out of the way and out of place. So they knocked it down and moved the boat into the new museum. Not far from Cairo, we got to visit Memphis. Memphis is the Greek version of the word. The Bible calls it Moph, where we see an amazing statue of Ramses II. We move on to Saqqara, where we see a huge burial site, the oldest burial site in Egypt, as such as a major concentration of tombs, and the oldest stone structure in the world, the step pyramids built by King Chaucer. Here, I like to visit the tomb of the Princess Idut from 4,600 years ago. She documented items she saw. Look here, for example, they want to convince the herd of cows to cross the Nile River, so they carried the calf, who is the son of the leading cow. So she follows him and everybody follows her. We learn about the fish that used to live in the Nile River at that time. One of the scenes that impressed her, look, there were hippopotams. And here is a hippo giving birth, and unfortunately a crocodile is waiting there to devour the baby. And you look at scenes that people described and you cannot believe how clear it is and how interesting for us to see what did they experience all these thousands of years ago. Not far from there, you go down into a huge cavern carved out of the bedrock with dozens and dozens of huge sarcophagi, which were supposed to contain the mummies of bulls, the sacred bull, Apis. How on earth did they do it? They brought the rocks from far away. How did they move it? How did they lower it? What was the intention? Many, many question marks, and I'm fascinated by it. Every month, you're going to see a new discovery. You're going to read, and you must have seen in the news, in the newspapers, on television, radio, whatever. Almost every month, every 2 months, we have new discoveries, major discoveries being done all the time in that area. And we know it still has so much more to reveal. I'm jumping fast forward to where I like to conclude the tour in Egypt, which I did yesterday morning after traveling for 9 days through this amazing country. And this is the newest museum, the Museum of Egyptian Civilization, a beautiful building, a remarkable modern architecture set up in an area which used to be a huge dump next to an unpleasant slum and garbage pile. And now they made a beautiful park and a beautiful museum. And it was here that they brought the mummies. You must have seen it on television, April 3rd, actually, last year, 2021. They took 22 mummies from the old Egyptian museum. They gave them a real regal procession through town, escorted by the army and the police with great honor. All the kings and queens were brought into a special section of this museum, which is done with the most fantastic audio visuals, interactive presentations, and really, really special for us. After you travel through the country and you get to know this king and his son and his father and his wife and his sister, and all of a sudden you see them in person. And it's really a very special experience, I must admit. But it's not only ancient Egyptology and pharaonic stories. They have here all kinds of items from later periods and even Jewish items. Some ancient Hebrew manuscripts, the Bible is written on a very special vellum made out of a deer skin and cases for the Torah. This Muslim item is kind of a canopy which is being saddled on a camel, hand embroidered with gold and silver. They create this cover to the Kaaba stone in Mecca. Every year, Egypt used to send such covers to Mecca until Saudi Arabia found a lot of oil and they said, all right, we don't need your gift anymore. We're going to do it ourselves. We'll take the airplane now from Cairo and we fly all the way down to almost by the border with Sudan to the Abu Simbel temple. Some incredible temples that were not built. They were hewn and carved and chiseled out of the bedrock. Imagine 3,200 years ago. 2 groups of temples built by Ramses II in his honor and one in honor of his wife, Queen Nefertari. But the temples used to be in an area where they were going to build later on the Aswan Dam, and all of this area would be flooded. So they started fearing the rising water of the Nile River because of the dam. They created a big project in which they started salvaging many monuments. Dozens of temples were removed. One of them you could see next time you travel to New York. An entire temple is positioned at the Metropolitan Museum in Manhattan, another one in Madrid, in various locations. This particular one, they cut these huge statues to pieces using modern technology and reconstructed them on a higher position, creating a huge iron dome with concrete and covered it with stones and sand, and you don't even know that you're looking at the new location. So it's like a double miracle as far as I'm concerned. First, the construction of these temple, and then thousands of years later, removing them, and we step inside and everything looks exactly as it looked before they moved it. They completed the job by 1970. We travel now to the town of Aswan. That's where the dam was built. It's a very colorful and very nice city. And one of the nice things to do is to take a ride on this sailboat called Faluka, built by the local population, the Nubian population. It's a huge bustling city on one hand, built and grew up because of this dam that has really changed everything there, yet it features some very charming spots, very soft, quiet spots. This is a very nice hotel, the Old Cataract Hotel. And you look at the Elephantine Island, right across the island that we have mentioned. You either stay at some nice fancy hotel or in some very lovely boutique hotels that were set up by the local Nubian population, featuring many characteristics of their own art and architecture. A nice experience to do. Another interesting place to visit is the mausoleum of Aga Khan, the leader of the Ismailite Muslims. You take a boat ride to visit a beautiful temple which was moved to the Fila Island. You visit the granite quarries to see the unfinished obelisk, and you think how on earth this one was not moved, but many others were moved. This one was broken in the middle of the work. All the granite in Egypt comes from this area, from Aswan. And we know of the obelisks that were 980 tons. What did they use to create them? We can figure out, but how did they move them? We go on to see a very nice botanical gardens on the banks of the Nile River in Aswan, on the Kitchener Island, a magnificent botanical gardens with plants that were brought from all over Egypt, from various locations in Africa, a nice experience. I personally love the Nubian Museum, featuring items that were discovered in this region in Nubia. And now we continue from Aswan, we go north by way of Komombo, Edfu on our way to Luxor, which is a major highlight. How do we do that? We can either surface or take a Nile cruise. You can take 3 days, 4 days, 7 days, or 11 days visiting many sites along the Nile River. And it's definitely a wonderful way to explore. It's not a large distance, but it's nice not to check in and out of the hotels and enjoy the scene as you ride on the Nile with the greenery on the banks and seeing all these ancient ruins on both sides of the Nile River. So we visit here the temple of Komombo. It's a double temple. One of them is dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek, and we see the different ceremonies, and we even see dozens of mummified crocodiles. They deified the crocodile, and then they mummified many of them. So it's a very interesting experience. We move on to Edfu, a temple dedicated to the falcon god Horus, and we visit the temple. To see the Holy of Holies with the replica of the ark that carried the image of the god from one temple to the other. Quite an interesting visit. The original statues are still there, facing us at the entrance to the temple. We now continue, as I mentioned, to go and discover the highlight, which is the town of Luxor. Here you're going to have dozens and dozens of boats docking, and it is a beautiful, beautiful resort, in addition to being an interesting archaeological site with a nice promenade. They call it the Corniche along the Nile River. You cross the Nile River to the west bank to visit maybe the most incredible burial site, as far as I'm concerned, anywhere in the world, the Valley of the Kings. This is where dozens of tombs were dug out by archaeologists. Unfortunately, most of them were visited before by robbers who did not leave much there, except for the paintings on the walls and some features and some characteristics. But it's still amazing. You go dozens and dozens of feet, hundreds of feet, some of them, into the rock underground. And the paintings look like they were done the day before yesterday. And we learn so much from what it is about the life of that particular king or royalty or divinity as described on the walls and the ceilings of these tombs. A single mind-blowing experience in every way you look at it, especially since you look at the date and you can put together all this information. It's really mind-boggling. Look at the conditions of the paintings, and they were done thousands of years ago. Maybe one of the most exciting ones is the tomb of Tutankhamun, the only tomb that was found, discovered its in entirety. And recently they brought his mummy back. It did not fare very well in Cairo in the museum, so they brought it back to the place where he was for thousands of years before the body was removed. And the tomb was discovered exactly 100 years ago, November 1922. Here we look at some of the colossal items, the largest statues in the world. We call them the Colossi of Memnon. Actually, it's not Memnon from the Greek mythology. It's just a corruption of the name. It's Amenhotep Amenophis III, king of Egypt. And we go to see the tomb of a lady, maybe the single most remarkable lady, or even she is the most remarkable pharaoh, with all due respect to all the men. This is Queen Hatshepsut. This is the funerary temple she built for herself in that area next to the Valley of the Kings. An amazing visit. From here, we got to see maybe the most beautiful tomb in Egypt. This is in the Valley of the Queens, the tomb of Queen Nefertari. She was the wife of Ramses II, and her tomb is definitely absolutely outstanding. Coming back to Luxor, we visit two temples. First, we visit the Luxor temple, the small one, which is quite fascinating. I like to visit it at night. It's beautifully illuminated, and you should definitely consider it, especially during the hot days. It always cools down in the evening, and you can still enjoy it. 2 miles of avenue lined up with this ram-shaped sphinx directs us to the other temple, the largest temple in the world. This is the Karnak temple, divided into many sections, but the core and heart of it is this hypostyle, the main column hall, 132 columns, decorated and covered by designs, and many of them still retain the original colors, especially the lintels above. And you visit the site and you learn a lot, especially when you go to visit on the outer side of the temple, a beautiful description of the first peace treaty in the world. This is the description of the Battle of fought between Ramses II and the Hittite Empire. Of course, the Hittites describe it as their victory. He describes it as his victory. From the artistic point of view, look, it looks like what they did the original movie to show motion. Can you imagine to have done it over 3,000 years ago? Also here you can visit at night. They offer a sound and light show. And also here you can take a nice ride on a felucca. I want to go back now to Cairo, and I'm going to go back to the Jewish neighborhood. This was called the Jewish neighborhood, where thousands of Jews, mostly lower middle class people, lived, but now not a single Jew is here. Not a single Jew. Now it's like a little rundown kind of a slum of the city. Still dozens of synagogues exist. None of them is in use. Some of them were recently restored. The Egyptian government has allocated millions and millions to restore and to preserve the synagogues. So this was, the Maimonides synagogue, and this is the Ben Ezra synagogue, maybe the most important because of what was discovered there, and that was the Geniza. We have reason to believe that Maimonides himself prayed here and studied here, and the local folk legend says this is where, in a small canal of the Nile River, the daughter of Pharaoh found Moses and took him to the palace. So it's like a very moving place for the Jews here. It's a very old synagogue. We have reason to believe that already in the 9th century, Jews have purchased what used to be an old Coptic church and converted it into a synagogue, adding the ladies section. And the most interesting thing happened a little over 100 years ago, where a big cache was discovered, an incredible treasure, documents, hundreds and thousands of documents, letters, copies of ketubot, wedding certificate, death certificate, contracts, halachic discussions, and so on. They were all taken, and we found in there even some original manuscripts of Maimonides himself and of his son, Rabbi Abraham. This is Professor Schechter studying these piles and piles and piles that were documented, and they provide us with the most unbelievable resource of knowledge and know-how about Jewish life, not only in Egypt, because they corresponded with all over the world. So when you sent a letter 600 or 700 years ago, you didn't know if an answer will ever come, and if the answer will come, who the heck would know what did you write? So they kept a copy of the letter you sent to compare it with the answer, if you had the halachic dispute or whatever. Another synagogue, and an interesting book that ended up being here after it was written in Tiberias. Before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, this was the oldest known version of the Bible, and we have reason to believe that Maimonides has based his commentary on the Bible, on the Torah, using this very copy, imagine, from the 10th century of the Common Era. Excuse me. And it ended up being in Aleppo. This is the Aleppo Codex, which is one of the most important manuscripts of the Torah anywhere in the world. Maimonides was born in Cordova, moved to Fez, fleeing the Almuwahidin, the ones who tried to convert by force everybody to Islam, ended up in Cairo, where he practiced medicine. He was actually the personal physician of the Sultan, of Saladin himself. Yet he wrote, look at this incredible document in his handwriting. He wrote 14 books with incredible detailed description in various topics of Jewish studies. It is so moving for us to look at original manuscript. Now, the newest synagogue that was added in Center City, where the Jews were prosperous. This is the Sharei Shamayim synagogue in Adley Street. It was recently again renovated, but of course, not only there is no minyan, there is never a service there in any way. The community in Cairo is maybe 6 people, mostly ladies, maybe 18 people in Alexandria, and basically there might be some more, but as I said, we don't think there are even 100 Jews there. That's another synagogue, a beautiful synagogue in Cairo. And it was in this synagogue, which is a synagogue that belongs to the Karaite community. I think we discussed the Karaite in one of our previous meetings, but you probably know of them. We found a book from the year, imagine, 1028. 1028, almost 1,000 years ago, and that is an incredible item. The synagogue, the interior of the synagogue again was touched up, and we move now to another town. We move now to Alexandria. Alexandria, a city that was named after Alexander the Great, was founded by him, has seen a very large Jewish community already in the 2nd century BCE. And it was here that 70 scholars were given the assignment of translating the Bible into Greek. And legend says that they came up with the identical same translation with hardly any differences. So this is what we call the translation of the 70. This is one of the oldest manuscripts showing us the story. The main synagogue that was totally redone recently is the Eliyahu Hanavi synagogue in Alexandria, and it was inaugurated with one of the high-ranking officials of the Egyptian government, Minister of the Interior. And I like to show there the seats of the synagogue had small, tiny little silver plaques showing the names of the people who would sit there. One of them says Mordechai Nadler. Mordechai Nadler is the father of Leah Nadler, who was the wife of Butrus Rali. Remember Butrus Rali? He was the Egyptian minister. He was married to a Jewish lady. He was Christian, a Copt, and she was the daughter of this gentleman who was a member of this community. Here we're going to see some pictures showing us the choir of the different organizations there. Look at the Jewish girls on a parade from the school in Alexandria. Now, unfortunately, we have here Mrs. Harun, the president of the Jewish community, coming during one of the rare occasions when visitors are to see the books and the scrolls in the synagogue. Beautiful, but no Jews. Nobody is there. A few more synagogues were built in town. And here we have maybe the last of the good old days before things went sour. In the center here, we have General Naguib, the one who led the revolution in 53 against King Farouk of Egypt, and subsequently the Republic was founded. He was moved aside, and Nasser took over, and we know what happened in 1956 when Egypt has declared they nationalized everything. The war erupted, led by England and France. Israel took over the Sinai Desert, reached the Suez Canal, and that was a good sign for the Jews to leave. Tens of thousands of Jews left within days after some of them suffered persecution and harassment and injuries and executions. Before leaving, to get a permit to leave, the Jews had to sign a document saying they relinquish, they give up their Egyptian citizenship, they will never claim it again, and they give up ownership to all the property they owned, their houses, the factories they owned, department stores. Jews owned the largest department stores. If you walk today in Cairo, you can still see names like Sikurel. There was Ben Sion, there was Tzruya, there were all these names. Jews were very, very prominent, some of them, and were very active in public life in the city. But all these 100,000 or more mostly left to Israel. Some of them left to France, to Italy, where they had the different passports. They could claim nationality and move there, and many of them moved, of course, to the United States, to Canada, to England, to Brazil, to Argentina. But as I mentioned, overwhelming majority of them moved to Israel. I want to pay tribute to a very special person who left Egypt during that time. You must have watched, and if you didn't, try to watch it, and you can see it on Netflix. This is the series called Spy, starring Sacha Baron Cohen, based on the true amazing story of the life of Eli Cohen. He was an Israeli spy who spied in Syria. Unfortunately, was captured and executed. We always mention his widow, who is still alive, and the only thing she wants to do, he was executed in 1965, and she hopes before she dies to have his remains brought to be buried in Israel. We don't know if it's going to happen, but we share, of course, her hope. There was no way I could go through thousands of years of history and with the many details of Jewish existence in Egypt. I thought I'll pick on some of the highlights and maybe trigger your curiosity so you can look up. And here you have my email, and I, as always, gladly respond if anybody has special any questions or comments. So I welcome your comments. I'll stop sharing now, and if there are any questions, I'll gladly answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Jacob, for taking us to Egypt. I never visited there, but I can tell you that we did get a lot of questions, whether is it safe to go and tour Egypt for Israelis, for Jews? Should we do it in a tour with a tour guide and security, or can we do it in individually?
So you can travel there. I cannot say, I will not dare to say it's safe. I mean, is it safe to be in Manhattan today? You saw what happened today in Manhattan. I'm not comparing. Did you get the news? Of course you did. Or, you know, in many different places. God forbid something could happen. But I feel safe because when you travel to Egypt, the Egyptian government goes way out of their way to protect you. We had with us, I went with an Israeli group. So we had armed security on the bus and a police car traveling ahead of us and behind us. And all the sites are perfectly monitored and controlled. So I must admit, I felt perfectly safe. And you can travel on your own, you can get a private tour, or you can join tours that are put together locally by local agencies. Or you can put a group together or join one of the organizations that puts a group together. To be honest with you, I would definitely recommend to try to go on a tour with a Jewish theme, a tour that will or at least mention, let alone concentrate. Because many of the people I know went on a tour with excellent local guides who did not know they are Jews, excuse me, and never mentioned any of the stuff that I mentioned. They didn't show any of the stuff that, even you stand in the museum, they stand in front of the Marnepta cell and they never mention the fact that that's the place where Israel is mentioned or the Israelites or anything. So if you want to do it, I'd like to suggest, and yes, I do lead tours in English. So if anybody is interested and you know of somebody who is interested to put a group together, 10 of you or 15 of you or 20, any number is a group, and we'll find the right day and I'll gladly put a beautiful itinerary and take you there. But you don't need me as Jacob because there are so many different organizations that do it. I just suggest try, if you're interested, of course, try to go on a Jewish trip.
Jacob, of course they need you. You're the best tour guide they
Oh,
never
no,
they
don't,
ever met.
no. There are
So
many wonderful tour guides.
they do need you. Someone actually asked if when is the next tour you leading for Egypt? Is there one?
I don't have anything scheduled. Right now, it's too hot to go. Don't dare to go before October. And if you want to go next year, I really like to suggest to make sure that they do open the museum. It's scheduled to open November 22nd. And that's when you should schedule, after November. And I would wait after December. It's going to be too crowded. So January, February, March. Don't go after early April. It's going to be too hot. I see a question here. How and why did the original Hebrews go down to Egypt? Because Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world. The Bible says there was hunger in the land of Canaan, so they went to Egypt. So did Abraham and so did Isaac after him. Thank you for your kind words. I see that...
Actually, Jacob, I do have a lot of questions here.
Please.
Two of them repeatedly been sent to me. The first one was, who built the pyramids if not the Jewish slaves?
Okay. The pyramids were built by the Egyptian farmers during the 3 months every year when the Nile River would inundate, would flood their fields, and they couldn't work the fields. So they did not, the Jews did not build the pyramids. As I mentioned, the Jews built the Pitom and Ramses towns, and they built this kind of border towns, and they built with bricks. And by the time the first Hebrews got there, the pyramids stood up for centuries, and they never got to this area. So they never saw them. Go ahead with your questions, because you have you do it in your order. Go ahead, I'll answer following your order.
I did put your email in the chat for everybody, for everyone who wants to contact you later, because we did got some messages about that. But let me continue with another very popular question here. With so few Jews left in Egypt, how come the government is being so generous with renovating the synagogue?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, the present government, following many years of cold shoulder we got from Mubarak, the present government works very hard to improve relations with Israel. They discovered that we are a true ally, not only because of the commercial cooperation and so on, but because of the common enemies that we have, mainly and namely Iran and Yemen and so on. So for defense and security, they view us as an ally. That's Israel. Number one. Number two, like many countries in Eastern Europe, it was a common belief that the road to Washington goes to Jerusalem. You want America to like you? Be nice to the Jews. I mean, I know I'm making it almost as a joke, but it's not. They want to show the world that they are very civilized and very enlightened and very interested in improving relations, and to welcome Jewish tourists and to welcome Israeli tourists. In 1980, when I started going to Egypt for the first time, for the following years, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis who went to visit. Needless to say, Jews from all over the world, among them some of you I see here in the comments. And then there were years where nobody went because there were the riots and upset. And then there was the Arab Spring, and they had to rebuild their economy and rebuild their country and rebuild even their, their image to themselves. So now they are very interested. They welcome us with open arms. We have almost daily flights. We're going to have many more next season. Now we have like 4 times a week, sometimes more. And we are going to have a real good time going there with ease of access with the visas and so on. Now it's a bit complicated for many people, but it's going to be much easier.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me go over another question. What was the paint in the tomb paintings made of?
What was the what?
Paint in the tomb paintings made of.
Thank you. So the painting were made out of ground rocks of different shapes and colors and shades, and all kind of plants. They knew how to infuse the plants, soak them in various solutions, and extract the different dyes from them. And this was the paint that was used.
Okay, thank you. And now we have a follow-up question of the pyramid. Did the builders use the flood to move everything?
We don't know. We have reason to believe they did because the pyramids are quite far away from the quarry where the stones came from. So how do you carry 2.5 ton stone and 2,300,000 of them? Partly, of course, by the flooding, like let's say on rafts, even though I don't know what raft could carry such weight. All right, so you got there. How do you lift them up 500 feet up? How do you do that? I still don't have a question. As I mentioned, you are going to read many theories. Personally, sorry to say, humbly yours, I was not convinced by all the theories. Nor, by the way, I must point, nor do I believe in the theories of the gods of outer space or aliens. No, extraterrestrials. No, I don't go for it. But there must have been some chapter in human civilization that was lost on us. I don't know how to describe it. But that's a personal observation of mine. I'm sharing with you a personal notion that I have. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Jacob, for everything. We received a lot of comments saying how wonderful you are and how great this presentation was. I do want to read one because we have so many, and then I'll give you your questions, but something that Toby write us. Thank you. Jacob, you are incredibly knowledgeable. The information and the pictures are over the top. Wow. Chag kasher v'sameach.
Thank you. Chag Sameach. I'd like to answer one question, which is quite important.
Okay.
Kenneth Miller. Oh, Kenneth, you wrote it directly to me, so may I read it to people, because I'd like to answer it. Kenneth wrote to me, what is your opinion on the relationship of the ancient Hebrews to the nomadic people described as the Habiru? Could very well be, hence Ivri, Hebrews, Avirus, Avor, Avar, could be. We don't know. It's an assumption. Some scientists believe that is some experts, some actually knowledgeable experts. We should treat seriously, of course, believe in it. There is another theory about the Hyksos. We think the Hyksos were in the different region, of course, coming from the other side. They were the people who were called the kings of the shepherds, describing them. If they are shepherds, means they are nomads. And they came either from the eastern desert or from the west, from Libya. And could very well be, but we don't have a direct link to tie together the description of the battles along the Hyksos, because the Hyksos did rule Egypt for a couple generations, for quite a few generations. So some of the pharaohs were of the Hyksos origin, the nomadic tribes. We don't know. Could be what we don't know.
Thank you, Jacob, so much. I'm gonna take this pause and tell you, everybody, Chag Sameach, Chag Pesach Sameach. We will see all of you only after Yom HaAtzmaut. We are doing Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, and Yom HaAtzmaut over here in person in the community, so we won't be seeing you for a while, but we wish all of you happy Passover. And right after Yom HaAtzmaut, we'll be visiting actually live in Jerusalem, so stay tuned for that, and we'll send you all the information after the holiday. Thank you for joining. Thank you for your support. It's always, we are grateful to see you on each virtual Tuesday, and we're grateful to have you, Jacob, as well. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful Chag.
Chag Sameach, everybody. Thank you, and shalom from Israel. Looking forward to seeing you here soon, too.
Yes, in October, the best month to travel. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And would love everybody listening to us to join us on the